But hello, as I said, my name is Shanti Gonzales. I am the engagement manager at Transit. So that's a role on the communications team, and I care a lot about engagement. Thank you for coming. So you can hear me okay? Let me know if there's any issues, that kind of thing. But I'm very excited to talk about this topic, communication being a two-way street, and how do we break down barriers to rider engagement. So I'm from Transit App, Transit App, trip planning, all the things. Hopefully some of you are familiar. I don't want it to be about Transit App. I want it to be about rider engagement. But if you have questions or that kind of thing, drop them in the chat. I'm going to leave some time at the end as well for Q&A, etc. So today my presentation is about apps and getting information to riders, but how might we use apps to collect information from riders, to communicate with riders, two-way street, etc. Planners, community engagement folks, we all know how important this is, but that communicating back from riders has gotten less attention in the app space. Colin Drake brought it up in his session about rider-centered decision-making at 11:30. And I agree, there is a lot of room for tech to put riders front and center. So why is it important? I mean, I'm definitely preaching to the choir here, but we are hopefully trying to combat governance by who shouts the loudest or who whispers in the right ear. We want to combat skewed governance. And we want agencies to be able to hear back from riders about what went wrong, but also what went right on their trip. And it's really important for agencies, advocates, and legislators to hear what riders want and need from their transit agency. So I'm going to talk a lot about what we've been working on at Transit, and we're really excited about, I'm not advancing slides yet, but thank you, whoever gave me that tip. I'm a person who likes to talk a lot. So I'm going to talk about what Transit's been working on, but I really am trying to situate this in a larger conversation. So at the end, I'm really curious about what other parties, what other folks are working on in this realm, and talking about it kind of as a piece of the puzzle. Now, the goal is to kind of kick off a conversation about how we can make sure that we are hearing systemically from riders and not from only those who have enough social capital or flexibility to go to meetings, get on email lists, call their elected officials. We want to make it more accessible to participate in the conversation, and in doing so, making use of our limited resources and hopefully achieving more equitable outcomes. So we are going to advance the slide now. So Transit's demographics, just to quickly situate the world that I'm speaking from. Sometimes I get the question like, apps, are those for tech bros? Like, what are you talking about? Is this really representative? But I'm happy to report, yes, it is representative. First of all, it is 2023, so most people have a smartphone. And according to Pew Research Center in 2021, which is already 2 years ago, it's crazy, but 85% of US adults have a smartphone. So smartphones do have a lot of reach. We find that Transit's demographics are representative of transit riders overall. And if anything, we tend to overrepresent bus riders because they rely very strongly on good real-time information. And they also tend to be lower income than rail riders in most markets. So as we see here, 41% of our users are non-white, and 30% of our users are age 40 or older. And we can break that down even more. So if we go more deeply into the colorful demographic charts, we see that it's not just students and young people using our app. In fact, most of our riders are not students. We see that most of our users do not own cars, and the typical household income is likely to be under $50,000 a year. So last year I sat down, worked on this report with my colleague, Stephen Miller, and other colleagues at Transit, and literally pulled up census data to compare this to be able to see what the truth was about our demographics. Because it's really important when it comes to how people receive information about transit service. So we have this quarterly survey that we run, we get a lot of responses on, and we ask, how do you recall receiving information from or communicating with two-way street, your transit agency during the past 6 months? And so some of you may remember last year at TransitCon, I presented on this report with my colleague, Stephen, that kind of breaks down the answer to this question about communications channels by demographics cross tabs. So like race and income specifically, to see which tactics were going where. You can check out that report on transitapp.com real life. I'm not going to like rehash the entire thing for you right now, but I'll give you the tilde, which is that Twitter and IRL meetings tend to overrepresent whiter, wealthier riders, which is not a surprise necessarily. It's just important to keep in mind. Whereas mobile apps, signage in the system, and customer support lines tend to go the distance with low-income riders and people of color. So you can watch the presentation from TransitCon last year and dive into the data at transitapp.com/real life. But this is all about communication to riders, and we want to know more about communication from riders. So I'm going to take you on a journey to the past. This topic at Transit has been on our mind for a very long time, but it's only recently that we've started to make real headway. Like I said at the start, we're trying to have a more representative swath of feedback to combat governance being skewed by who shouts the loudest. And we want to use our platform to help agencies, advocates, legislators, and other riders hear back from people who are actually riding the system. So our first try, as you can see here, is Transit Live in 2017. This was basically like a free form rider to rider kind of posting platform with upvotes and downvotes. And we piloted it in a few cities, including Boston, Pittsburgh, Montreal, and Quebec City. And it failed. It failed because it wasn't structured enough, is what we found. I mean, you see here, we have people like reporting information and engaging with it, saying like, oh, the stop is moved or it's running late, which, you know, in theory is useful information. The format wasn't very useful. It wasn't actionable. And yeah, and then it was like way too open. So someone tried to sell drugs on Transit Live, and it was mostly people saying, where the heck is my bus, which is not helpful. And that's Transit App's job to answer that question. So we were like, okay, back to the drawing board. So we killed this feature in 2018. Rest in peace. So then we tried with Go crowdsourcing. And unlike Transit Live, this is way more structured. So some of you may be familiar with Go. Basically, you tap the Go button and you get these step-by-step directions, but you also are crowdsourcing to give riders better real-time information about the location of your vehicle, bus or train. And it's, you know, it's fun. There are points, there are leaderboards, and users love it. Riders use it a lot. We have 125,000 trips a day completed with Go. And in 2018, we expanded this to all 300 cities that we support. And, you know, people are riding with their avatar, with their leaderboard, and it feels good to make the information better, both for other riders and for the agency, like as the system as a whole. So it feels good to engage, right? And so we're kind of building on this, right? So then, let me know if I'm like going too fast, or if anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat. Now we're kind of expanding on our trip plan, and we're looking at a feature that now we call Rate My Ride. So everything changed during the pandemic, the sentence we hear all of the time. But we were like, okay, what can we do? How can we help, you know? And so within the Go experience, we added support for crowding information, and we added this question so that users could share how crowded their bus was when they were riding with Go. So this information was then immediately shared with other riders, and it had a great response rate. 58% of people who saw the prompt went and reported. And even agencies like M.MTA in Baltimore used it to validate their real-time crowding information. So they could see if what riders thought was crowded at the height of the pandemic was the same as what the agency thought was crowded. So it was an interesting kind of like, are we on the same page? Are we talking about the same thing when we say crowded? So it proved to be a very useful feature. So we have been building on that. It really got our wheels turning. So we started asking more questions, like if we detect that you missed your bus, then what happened? Was it a ghost bus? Did it pass you? Are you actually on board and we didn't catch it? Like, what can we do about that? And in ghost buses, that's a really good one, because it is so freaking frustrating to be in that situation and have no engagement power. You're just like, oh, I guess this is my life. But just to give riders the opportunity to report something, even it's not talking to their agency, but it's giving us better information to share with other riders and to share back with the agency. Just giving the opportunity to do something is really meaningful in that situation. We also ask questions about, Did your bus or train come when you expected? What was that? We have star ratings as well. 5 stars is Beyonce. So was your ride Beyonce? And it turns out, actually, this is really fun. It turns out that most people have a great experience on their ride. Most rides are 5-star rides, despite public transit's reputation as a mode of last resort. And I think it's just, when you hear from people like in the traditional channels, it's because they had such a bad time that they were willing to jump through hoops to tell you that they had a bad time. You know how like on Google reviews or Yelp reviews, it's the person who had a bad time at the restaurant who's going to review the restaurant. But if you make it easy, like in the airport, those smiley faces, if you make it easy to just say, this was a-okay, this was totally fine, this was great, you get that feedback too. And I think that agencies and operators really deserve the feedback when a ride goes well, because we get skewed because we're only receiving the negative responses. But actually, the vast majority of rides are 5-star Beyonce rides. To answer a question, does this integrate with Clever or Move It? Nope, this is a transit feature. This is something that we're kind of building within the app experience. So rate my ride. That's the thing that we are working on. And then we get this data back to agencies in the form of reports. But then we want to take it a step further and make this information really useful for the agencies. So we have custom questions. So if an agency has a specific strategic goal, a specific thing that they need to look into, they can integrate that into the Rate My Ride experience. We go back and forth and get the app copy just right. But then we can kind of identify specific target areas that are in line with their goals. So in San Francisco, we're asking a question about cleanliness at the stop. For STTR here in Quebec, we're asking about the driving. How did that feel? And the responses that the agencies are collecting by putting it in transit are linked to vehicle, time of day, route, like OD information. So it's really, really granular, the data attached to the response, which then helps make it much more actionable, because they can see, oh, I'm seeing a trend at 3 p.m. on Tuesdays. It's not really going so well on this line. Let's go see what's up. And the hope is, by giving riders the ability to engage at that part of their ride when they're thinking about it, when they're seeing it, it's like real-time engagement, and giving agencies all the information that they need to follow up on it, we're kind of connecting that two-way street, or making it possible for that information to actually go somewhere and actually have input. But it is important to note that we have to keep experimenting with these kinds of questions. And that's kind of the fun part about being at transit, is we can be kind of nimble about these things in our experimentations, because when we find something doesn't work, we can go back to the drawing board and try again. So we had this question in the Rate My Ride experience about wheelchair accessibility at stops. At first, we asked all riders while they were waiting at a stop. But then we realized we didn't really give riders enough information to answer, is the stop accessible? We got a lot of feedback from these riders who didn't use wheelchairs, who didn't know what to answer. Like, they didn't know if it was sufficiently flat or if there was enough space. And so we were like, okay, legit. So we then tried restricting the question to people who had accessibility information enabled in the app. But then that didn't yield enough total responses for us to draw meaningful conclusions from it. So we're still developing how might we make that feature, that question, work about accessibility information. And this is really important information. So it's a priority, because most agencies don't have the resources to do a complete audit of bus stop accessibility. And so this data is often missing in GTFS. So we're really like, how can we adjust this question to provide more useful results? So to address these types of shortcomings, some of the things we're working on, we're cooking up branched follow-up questions, logic-based follow-up questions, as well as a new feature designed to crowdsource reports about your bus stop, which can then get shared with the transit agency. So keep an eye out. Okay, then that's Rate My Ride. That's the integrated survey experience. But we also have a different way to integrate feedback, which is network previews and traditional surveys. So agencies are often running their own surveys, and they have a type form, they have a survey link that they want to share with riders, and we can get that in the app. But also a cool thing that we've been doing, this is kind of side note, network previews are very interesting, and I could do a whole talk about that. So if you have questions about that, do share them. But I'm not going to focus too much on this, even though it's like super interesting. But basically with network redesigns, If the agency can share the new GTFS ahead of time, we can put it into the app as a preview feed, which the user can then enable and start like playing with the new feed, the new information in the app experience they already know. So they can start planning trips on the new network ahead of time and see how that's going to affect their trip ahead of time. And I think like what I find really fun about that, again, is the engagement of it, the being able to like actually literally handle the new network and see it in a way that is already the behavior that you have with the old system, how that's going to affect you. So that's pretty exciting, pretty useful. But then we take it a step further where we can put the survey in the app to be like, okay, you played with the new network. What did you think? And share feedback. So just this week, WMATA is asking riders about its better bus plan, and SFMTA is asking about service improvements. And we've partnered with SEPTA, which are the screenshots you see here, who's working with Nelson Nygaard and doing that kind of preview mode, tap through to provide feedback instantly. And more than 10,000 SEPTA riders have checked it out, which is pretty great. A pretty great way to interact with something scary like change management. Sure. There we go. Okay. So the last piece of the puzzle that I want to tell you guys about today of what we're kind of working on at Transit and how we're pushing this is advocacy on a higher level. And we're working with APTA on this. So first level, we have riders crowdsourcing information with each other. Then we have agencies hearing from riders to improve operations. But then we're like, what if we take it a step further and influence policy? So this month, we launched our first campaign with APTA's Voices for Public Transit Coalition. So backstory, they're trying to find persuadable suburban Republicans in the House to show them why their own constituents want them to preserve funding for public transit. And they're taking a story-based approach. They want stories from riders about how this works. So just like last week, 2 weeks ago, we launched a message in the app in Minnesota asking for these firsthand stories about why public transit is important. And dozens of stories were shared. And they're going to be used as by APTA to target representatives from Minnesota. And some examples of these stories, quote, without public transit, there would be fewer job opportunities for me out there, and this enables me to be a contributing member of society. Or quote, there are so many things I would not be able to do, work, school, volunteer work, et cetera, if it weren't for robust public transit service. So getting these stories, collecting these stories while in the app that riders are thinking about public transit. They're in the app because they're going to ride or they're already riding. And then getting them to share those stories can actually make a difference. And the riders themselves can then choose to sign up for info on future advocacy efforts so they can speak up when the moment is right in Washington. And this is kind of building on the idea that everybody who rides the bus can be an activist. I know so many people, myself included, before I worked at Transit, where I love my transit service and I have all kinds of thoughts and wanting to share and get involved, but I never knew how. It was not intuitive to me about where to go or how to do that. But when you put it in the tool that they're using to just see what time the bus is coming, you can make that connection point, and the tool is right there in their pocket. And that kind of encourages people to be like, yeah, you know what? I am an advocate for public transit, or at least that's the goal. That's the dream for sure. So yes, conclusion, how we communicate matters. Of course, I'm a big proponent of data-driven comms tactics, which can save agency resources by targeting their efforts into channels that have a lot of reach, can improve equitable outcomes, equitable connecting points. Transitapp.com/real life, of course. And I see that as a big part of Transit's role is we have a lot of data. We have a ton of riders. It's 1 in 10 riders across North America is opening the app every single day. We get all those responses to that survey with the demographic information, the comms channels. And so it's our job to kind of take that information and like squeeze out an espresso shot of actionable stuff that the agency can take, lighten the load for the agency and help them hit the ground running with that. And then also we believe in using existing tools and behaviors, things that are already there that riders already know, to reach and receive riders from where they actually are. Because using these tools, if we can use the right tools to share the right info at the right moment, I think that really goes together and it can really help us go very articulate. So communicating matters, but also listening matters, because it is not easy to get riders to share the right feedback at the right moment. And, we're all experimenting. We're all trying to figure out what that actually means. But Our hope is that by making feedback more immediate, by drawing from a broad base of riders, by engaging in a way that's not disruptive, we might be able to drive changes to behavior, operations, and policy. And I think the disruptive thing too, like for me, my colleagues joke sometimes the way that I talk about this stuff, I'm like a marriage counselor for transportation, but like maybe we need that, because by not disrupting, by making it feel good, that back and forth of communication, maybe we'll turn toward, instead of kind of turning away and just being like, man, this is so frustrating, or look who shows up at the public meetings just to yell at us or whatever. By making it easy to connect, maybe we can turn toward. At Brene Brown, if you're listening, you have a disciple. But for real, I think the point that I really want to take away from this is that changing the way that we collect feedback by expanding access to feedback channels, that can bring us closer to the truth, and getting better, more accurate data that's more representative of the reality is what we need. Because, you know, the little tagline, you know, governance by who complains the loudest, like it's not even shade at those people, because honestly, power to them that they're engaging and interacting. They're not the problem. It's about how our limited feedback channels skew our perception of what's going on. And the more that we can gather a representative sample, the more accessible we make feedback, the closer we can get to the truth. And then the closer we can get to making impactful policy and change. Because if our data is more representative, then our policy and operations can be more representative. So that is my talk. I would love if anybody has any questions. I'm going to dive into the chat right now and see what was happening. Let's see. Network redesign feature is super cool. Cleveland, love Cleveland. Cleveland's network redesign, RTA public meetings would have fewer than 10 participants. Putting the new network into people's hands on their trips is incredible. Obviously, not everyone has smartphones, but it would include many people then attend public meetings. Exactly. Not everyone has smartphones. That is super true. Like I said, the research from 2 years ago, 85% of US adults, and that's missing 15%. And I think like my presentation, what we're talking about here is really about the reach that transit has. And like I said, it's a piece of the puzzle. But I think word of mouth can also be really powerful. And just, it may be someone who does have a smartphone is able to influence their friends, or just be like, hey, I'm getting involved and it feels good. Or I don't know, maybe I'm being like optimistic, rah, but I do think that there is power in the community engagement of public transit. Benoit Graton from Verdun. Oh, hello, neighbor. Left a comment about high rates about smartphone adoptions. Go Montreal. For advocacy, would you be able to connect with transit rider groups already established? Yes. If you are running a campaign locally, drop us a line at partners@transitapp.com. And because the way that we work with the banners is it's really geo-targeted, and we can be really specific about that. So we can see what we can do that could have the most impact, and that can be a conversation. So partners@transitapp.com. Howard Tam asks, does transit do the user insight synthesis in-house as well, or do you leave it to the agency to do so? We have an incredible data science team at Transit. So we can provide dashboards that synthesize rate by ride info, but we can also share the raw stats with agencies so they can do their own analysis. But we're doing what we can internally to make the information accessible and usable for agencies on the go, because we don't want them to like get drowned in an endless spreadsheet. It's great that the spreadsheet is endless because they have a lot of engagement, but how useful is the overwhelm of information? So our amazing data science team at Transit is helping agencies make sense of that. And we also provide the raw data. What is the biggest barrier to rolling out the magic ball estimates to more agencies? Cost of running, cost of setup, something else. I found my agency's estimates haven't really been adjusted for post-COVID travel patterns and traffic delays. For background, so agencies provide their own real-time information to us. In some cities, Transit provides our own predictions when we can provide more accurate predictions using machine learning, beep boop, etc. There's a great blog post on our website about this. But we can provide more accurate in cities where we can provide more accurate predictions. We do, but we don't have it in every city. And so we're always looking to see where we can add that where we can, if it will help. Again, it really helps to just reach out, partners@transitapp.com, if you have questions about your specific agency or city, because then we can like dialogue and be like, oh, that's what's going on with that data, and tweak it to make it work. Because transit, we're a small team. We're about 60, 65 people, and we're all really nerdy, and we all really we think transit agencies are like superstars, and we want to help you. So reach out so that we can dialogue with you, our heroes, but also to make sure that the app is connecting on that granular level. Like, we don't really see the app as this one size fits all solution for all places. And so helping draw our attention to what's going on in your system is really helpful, actually. So yeah, okay, back to the chat, finding more questions. Let's see. Oh, Detroit redesigning the network. Cool. I hope we talk. That would be awesome. Are we thinking about scaling beyond the areas covered by the transit app? I'm not sure if beyond the areas you mean, Alina, if you mean beyond the specific like cities where we have coverage, or if you mean something else, areas of inquiry, etc. But if we have data and we have ridership, we're trying as much as we can to be integrating all of the tools to get feedback from that ridership. So we're trying to scale it as much as possible. And then we work with agencies themselves to sort of strengthen the impact in their system based on their specific needs and goals, if that answers your question. Is there any update on the effort to better track street closures and detours? Yes. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but we recently launched machine learning detours with the STM here in Montreal, or automated detour detection is what I should say. So we're using machine learning, we're using the power of crowdsourcing and that kind of thing to, if we detect a bus has gone off the route enough times, we're like, oh, that's probably a detour, which is very useful in Montreal because there are a lot of detours. So it's really useful information, but it's not just the path. We can also get the stops because we're super nerds who figured out a way to get the stops to show on the map. And that has been very helpful, especially because recently we had this horrible ice storm. People in like half the city was without power for up to 5 days. Power lines down, trees. It was like nightmare mode in April. So that's Canada. But the detours really helped because it was already up and running. So people could know, like so many routes were detoured, but riders could know where their stop and where their line was in a time where it really mattered. And that kind of took the pressure off the STM in terms of like the pressure of real-time communicating when they're just trying to keep people safe. You can read more about this at transitapp.com/detours. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much. This has been so much fun. You can reach out to us again at partners@transitapp.com or me, Shanti, at transitapp.com. And yeah, I'll see you around.